and really understand our story about millennials and young people and their consumption habits, you have to look at the march of two forces, two narratives since the 2000s. And if you look at the 2000s, it's bookmarked by two main things. It's the crisis of information and the liberation of information. First, if you focus on the crisis, if you look at the 2000s, they were bookmarked by three huge geopolitical events. Number one, at the start of the 2000s, the war on terror. Number two, throughout the 2000s, and still to this day and ongoingly, the talk about climate change. And at the end of the decade, the economic collapse. And so there's these crises, and the casualty of these crises for our audience and for our young people was trust. So trust in government, trust in experts, trust in institutions, trust in systems, and most importantly for us in this room today, to us lot, is trust in media. So if you look at, like, this is the Pew report, and I'm sure all of you have seen this before. News organizations' believability ratings in precipitous decline, constantly declining. And the interesting thing I like about this is it's not politicized at all. CNN, centrist, MSNBC, left, Fox, right. It's going down whatever you look at. No one believes what they're reading anymore. No one believes what they're seeing anymore. The formats aren't right. The stories aren't true. No one believes it. Young people in particular don't believe this anymore. So this has just given a huge opportunity for people like us to become entrants into the marketplace. And if you look at the crisis in media, it's incredibly acute, and you look at why it happened. So on the first, the war on terror, was the media co-opted? Was the co-optation on weapons of mass destruction? False equivalence. So 98% of the scientists said one thing: this is happening, we know it's happening, but the media portrayed it 50-50, again, leading to a lack of trust. And then, at best, complete ignorance. So it could be, with the economic collapse, was it self-interest and greed, or was it ignorance? Either way, it's not ineptitude or corruption. Neither of those are great answers for young people. And so you have these three huge forces happening together, that young people are experiencing, but simultaneously there was this other narrative in the noughties, in the first decade, which was the liberation of information. So you had all this crisis, and then you had a liberation. Liberation is, we all know about this stuff: bandwidth, free flow of information, social media, peer-to-peer, person-to-person sharing, recommendation, direct communication, and mobility being always on. So we have this huge other forces happening to young people at the same time, while there's massive distrust happening on the other side. And so this is where Vice flourished. This was the decade which Vice came of age, and the decade which our audience flourished. And the rise of Vice was quite simple in lots of ways. First thing was desktop publishing. Technology came for us. We could produce our magazines and our websites in our bedrooms, effectively. Digital video, cameras got cheap, Final Cut Pro got cheap, everything else got cheap. It became accessible. There was no barriers to entry anymore in order to make the stuff, so we can make stuff cheap. We can make stuff the same as everyone else with the best technology, just as good, but just cheaper than everyone else. And then, obviously, distribution. So the internet came and gave us distribution. So this democratization of technology and flattened distribution made Vice possible to scale what we did well, which was storytelling, leveled the playing field. What we did really well was we just adopted and adapted really, really fucking quickly. So looking at it, like, how did this crisis and liberation of information relate to Vice? And the first story we actually ever had, and so we were a print magazine, and we moved into video. The first video we ever made for our online television network, which was in 2006, end of 2006, start of 2007, when we were still in, a lot of people were in bandwidth, dial-up stage and bad bandwidth and all this stuff. But we did this film about a heavy metal band called Krasakauda, who were based in Baghdad. So we told the story of the Iraq War through these kids who were just trying to play music in Baghdad. And what was interesting about it was a story in the magazine. We just thought it was interesting, so we just went there with our cheap cameras and our cheap technology and started filming. And just telling this great story. So it started with this amazing story.